Welcome! Wow, it's actually very first time that we're having two interviewees at the same time. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Gerald Ortiz y Pino. I'm a New Mexico state senator. I represent downtown Albuquerque district. And I'm the chairman of the Senate Health and Public Affairs Committee. I'm a social worker by training, but I retired when I joined the legislature, I retired from actively working as a social worker. But I was here as a social worker for 42 years before that.
Wow. Thank you, sir. Now, you told us that you're working as a social worker. What is the most important aspect of the work as a social worker?
Social workers have to be able to establish relationships. Everything we do, we don't have technical skills, we don't operate machinery. Our toolbox is our ability to create relationships and to use those relationships to bring about change in people, individuals, families, communities. Change agents is another way of saying social worker.
So, Senator, I also heard that you established 4 high schools for the dropout students. Now, if I may ask, what motivated you to do so?
When I was working for the city of Albuquerque in the late 1990s and the first year of the 2000s, I was the director of the Department of Family and Community Service. It was a very large department that had the housing programs, the mental health programs, the youth programs, the children's programs, the aging programs. They were all in that department if they had to do with social services of any sort. One of the big issues was in our community, and it's still the case, very, very many children were dropping out of high school. They were leaving high school. Sometimes they never made it to high school. They were leaving in middle school. And our graduation rate at that time was barely 60%. I think it was under 60% actually. We found a way of responding to the needs of young people that had not done well in the regular high schools. And we tried to use that system through the new mechanism. Before that, it wouldn't have been possible, but the state had passed a charter school bill that made it possible to use public money to create new innovative schools. And so we started with a school called Robert F. Kennedy that responded to the needs of dropout youth here in Albuquerque. Then we did one that focused on young people who were in jail. And we used the school to begin involving them back in their high school education while they were in jail, and then they could continue when they got out. We call that one Gordon Burnell Charter School, and we named it after a man who had been very active in helping people who were in trouble with the law. Then I was hired by an organization that wanted to create charter schools in southern New Mexico. And I went to Deming, New Mexico and started a charter school there. And then I went to Anthony, New Mexico and started one there, but always for dropouts, using some of the same techniques. That is, simply trying to keep the classes small, trying to use a lot of bilingual techniques because so many of the dropouts were not good at English, and so that's why they were having trouble in school. And by hiring teachers who were able to establish relationships with the young people and stick by them even if they were having trouble.
Wow, I think it's very significant that establishment of high schools, any school for the dropout students to help them and to give them support that they need. Was there any memorable stories or personal experience while doing so?
We had the school in Deming. We were invited there by the people that worked for a community organization. They saw a great need, but the local school district didn't agree. they were very opposed to our starting a school there. So it took us 3 separate years of coming before them, making the case, trying to explain to them that this was in no way going to threaten their own public high school system. This was simply for the young people that they weren't serving. Finally, what it took was we established personal relationships with some of the school administrators and got past that hurdle. It helped that we were able to find a principal who had worked in their schools and they knew and trusted. That got us past the barrier of being perceived as outsiders, as somehow foreign to their community. And when the school district gave the approval, then we were able to move ahead. And it's worked very well, actually, since then.
Wow. It sounds like it would have been a very difficult hurdle to overcome, but I'm really glad that it worked out fine. Now, I've also heard that you're trying to establish peace department within the government. Could you please explain a little bit more about this?
It was actually not my idea initially. A group in Santa Fe had been working for longer than that, trying to get a Department of Peace created. At first, it was going to be an Office of Peace. And then, for a variety of reasons, they felt it would be better to have a Department of Peace. The Office of Peace would have simply been in the governor's office, working to try to improve or to reduce the reliance on violence in all aspects of civic life. The Department of Peace was going to be more of an educational and a prevention and preparation initiative, so that we would be preparing teachers, for example, who could do peace-oriented work in the schools. We would be preparing counselors and social workers who could do more peaceful approaches to their jobs. But each year we had a difficulty. First, it is a kind of a hard to pin down concept. People saying, what do you mean peace? There was some suspicion among some of the politicians in the legislature that we were trying to undermine American military readiness, or that we were trying to undercut the police, or that we were trying to change things too fast. So there was a lot of just explaining and persuading. And each year we got a little closer. We had a few more votes, but ultimately the administration changed, and a lot of the headway we had made, we had to start all over again with the new administration. And about that time, the elderly woman in Santa Fe, who had been the driving force behind that, became ill and passed away. She was in her late 80s already. And so with her loss, the organization that had been working so hard on this and that had asked me to sponsor the bills decided that they would just back off and try to regroup. But we got very close.
Now, sir, despite all the skepticism that came from the people, what made you think that this work, creating a peace department, was needed in the society? And what part of today's current society do you think that we need such department?
In some ways, it's even more necessary now than it was 10 years ago when we gave up that effort. In some ways, I say it's more necessary because the level of violence in our communities has just increased dramatically. Some people blame it on the restrictions that the COVID pandemic lockdown produced. Others say it's because of the level of drug use and the violence producing drugs that are so available now. Whatever the causes, we have terrific levels of violence and even hostility that doesn't reach the level of physical violence, but just anger and insults. We're losing some of our ability to have peaceful civil discourse and to disagree, but not to have to insult one another. That's a disturbing trend. I'm not going to be able to introduce the Department of Peace this year, but it may be something that we try at the 60-day session, our larger session next year in 2023. We need to do something to begin making people more aware of alternative ways of resolving their differences, of dispute resolution, of forgiving. It's becoming very difficult to conduct civic life if there's that level of outright violence and hostility. We need to lower the temperature.
Thank you for your answer, sir. Now, there are some cases that we are implementing education, peace education, into regular school curriculums. For instance, Philippines. They are taking peace as one of their subjects. Now, what is your opinion and what do you think about such curriculum being taken care of by the school?
I think that would be an excellent idea. That was actually a component of the peace department proposal, that there would be a whole component of it within the education department that would develop and foster the use of a curriculum for peace studies. There is one at the University of New Mexico, and we could modify that. So much of what goes on in this country is shaped by the belief that if you're not for me, you must be an enemy. I can't trust you. I can't sit down with you. I will just ignore you. And if you try to approach me, then we'll get into conflict. That's becoming a serious issue in this country. I hope it's not the case everywhere in the world, but I'm afraid it's becoming serious here. I think a peace studies program in the schools is a great idea. I certainly could support that.
Thank you, sir. Now, if we look at the system of how peace education done was in Mindanao, I think it's quite unique how they started from the grassroots level, from schools, civil society, to up to the government, and eventually coming up as a curriculum. I'm not so sure if this is a common way or usual way for a curriculum to be implemented, but I want to hear your opinion about it. What do you think about it, sir?
I actually think that's the best way to do it, from the grassroots up. We've been trying to impose this from the top down and not getting very far. But if we shifted the focus to working community by community with the local schools, I think we'd have a lot more success. It's certainly a much more consistent with my own values as a social worker and my own experience as a community organizer, that you get much better results if you could start at the local level. Then once it's established, other communities can see its effect, and it eventually can become something that turns universal.
Thank you, Senator, for all your responses. Now we're going to move on to Donna. Hello, Donna. If you could please introduce yourself for our audience.
I'm Donna Bruzzese, and I am not only a mother of 4 grown children, I've been a psychotherapist since 1977, actually 1975, and I'm still working. And I'm also currently the director of a nonprofit group, the director of the board, FOCES, Friends of the Children of El Salvador. The Friends of the Children of El Salvador is based on the teachings of Archbishop Oscar Romero, the Salvadoran Archbishop who was assassinated for speaking for the rights of the people. And it's a way to give a voice to those who are voiceless. So at present, we help with giving scholarships to young people so that they can attend high school and or college.
Thank you, Donna. If you could please share us your experience, any memorable stories that you had while working in this organization, if you can recollect your memory and bring out some memorable stories.
I can say that for 2 years running, we've had 5 students graduate from college, and their parents and the rest of the family never even finished grade school. They had to go into the fields or fish in order to feed their families. This year, we has graduated 4 social workers and 1 agronomist, and so and they have to commit to be community leaders. They're not doing this just for themselves. It's to help the entire community.
Thank you. I think it's very significant that you have paved the way for the students so that they can become a community leaders instead of following their own self-interest, but for the community. Now, based on that, what do you think is the importance of peace education for these students?
That's such a good question. One of the things that we do with the students and community members is we will have nonviolence trainings. The question is to train the young people and the community members what to do that is nonviolent and that brings peace. And that's especially important in areas where it's very, very economically poor, because like in Salvador and in New Mexico, there's a huge gang problem. It's almost like anarchy in death squads in El Salvador. In fact, one of our students, his father, because he didn't have any money, was shot by gang members right in front of him when he was 11 years old, and him and his brother. So it's how do you live your life in a peacemaking, loving way. And that's why the trainings are extra important.
Now, next question is for both of you. You can freely answer, or you can even have a converse amongst yourselves. Now, what do you think the meaning of world peace is?
You know, I'm really struck by almost the bumper sticker that you see sometimes that says, for peace, there has to be justice. And so often what leads to war or violence is the sense that somebody is taking advantage of the other. A country is taking advantage of another. They're not treating them well. And so that leads to warfare. And among individuals, it's the same thing, I think, that there's a sense that you've humiliated me or you've disrespected me, and so I'm going to strike back with violence. So I think the meaning of world peace would really be a world where there's justice, where there is a sense of treating each other with countries treating one another with respect.
I think there's that, and if you see and talk to people who are different than you, that brings about peace, because you don't see the enemy, you see their personhood. They're not the other. And as long as we see each other as other, there's going to be us against them.
HWPL, I noticed an emphasis on bringing religious groups together, of the different religious leaders coming together to dialogue, to have mutual sessions where they produce some kind of joint efforts. I think that really is wonderful. And we can see that happening in Albuquerque among some of the religious groups where they're pulling together instead of seeing what makes them different from the other groups, finding the commonality that unites us all.
Thank you. As mentioned in the very beginning of the interview, it's the very first time that we have 2 interviewees at the same time. And I want to ask you a special question for you today. How do you create peace in your lives together?
Donna mentioned that she's a widow. I was divorced, so it's a second marriage for each of us. And one of the things that struck me when I married her and moved into her home and was surrounded with her family and the 4 children and then now the grandchildren, was how each of her kids reaches out all the time It's a rare Thanksgiving or Christmas or any celebration at a house that Donna is the leader of that doesn't have some visitors, somebody else invited in. For example, at Thanksgiving, there was a Jewish man that her daughter met at her Torah study, and he came, and we invited to our house a former prisoner who came to speak about what life was like after he got out of prison. And he came and brought his wife, and another prisoner came. There's constantly people coming through the house. And I think that the kids that are growing up in that environment, our grandchildren, are equally open to that. They don't see differences, they see commonalities. And it's just through the practice of being open and inviting and willing to share. That struck me about her and her family. She's a very attractive person in her own right, but that spirit of the home and the family was really what attracted me.
Well, yeah, thank you, thank you, Sherry. But I think too, it's a common belief that there's something bigger than you going on. It's a belief. I will just call it higher power, but it's that we're not alone. There's some loving force that we have to tap into, and it's there if we just open up our eyes and look. And I think that because Jerry and I both share that deep conviction that it does generate a lot of positive energy and a willingness for all of us, the whole family, to go that extra mile. And it's not about material stuff. It's about loving and helping each other. And like you say, I love what you're doing, working to bring about peace. And I love that you're all so young. It just energizes the heck out of me. It's wonderful.
Thank you very much. I think you have a wonderful family, and they're very lucky to have both of you who have such a big heart, I think. Thank you once again. Now, I want to ask you, it's a little bit contrary from the previous question, but what do you think is an obstacle when it comes to achieving world peace? And how do you think we can overcome that?
To me, the thing that always gets in the way is the belief that if you get something, I'm losing something. That zero-sum game mentality. We're each reading, I read it, and she's now reading a book called The Sum of Us. And it makes the point that integration between the races in this country was handicapped because there were many communities that, rather than integrate their facilities, just shut them down. Swimming pools, zoos, parks, that they were willing to have even the white kids not have access to them rather than integrate them. And that comes, I think, from this belief that if the African American children get something, we're going to be losing something. But in fact, if we can produce the belief that if you do better, I do better, we all do better as we all go up together. That's, to me, the key obstacle. The notion that if China is prosperous, the US is somehow suffering. Or if African Americans in the US are getting something, then it's at the cost of Puerto Ricans or white people or Mexicans or everybody else. We have to break through that notion that that there's a limited amount of good. And if you get it, I don't have it. There's an infinite amount of good. If you get better and you get better and you get wealthier and you get more prosperous and better educated, we all can benefit from that.
Well, and don't you think too that at the base of it is fear?
Yes.
And so, and I think it's exacerbated too with, we have to pay attention to this climate change. I think with climate change now, people are becoming more and more afraid, and they're getting some people are getting greedier out of the fear to grab up the resources while it lasts. And so I agree with Jerry, and I think that despots, tyrants feed people's fear.
Thank you very much. I think both answers were very insightful, and I hope that all of us in society can overcome this hurdle together and face world peace in very soon near future. Now, it has come to the end of our interview, and I want to ask a question that we are giving for all our interviewees. As a person who devoted your life to the work of peace and making better changes for the society, do you have any final messages to deliver to our audience?
I can say, as having been a psychotherapist for 40 some years, and so being privileged to work with maybe thousands of people, that if the people who don't see that there's something bigger than them and that don't realize that love is the most important thing of all are the people that are lost and they die miserably. They're back in the United States years ago. There was a saying. It was like, you live your life and eat, I don't like to use the word SHIT, and die. It was that pessimistic, nihilistic way of believing in life. You get what you can and then you die. And I've only seen people, and I used to work with dying people too. It's a miserable way to live. And I firmly believe, along with the philosopher and priest Teilhard de Chardin, that the world is evolving and moving toward higher consciousness and toward love. I know that in my very soul, that that's what's happening. And people have trouble believing. Read Ken Wilber or Teilhard de Chardin, or just go down and meet someone in another country where people don't take things for granted and don't have all the assets that we have. What do you think, Jer?
Well, it's hard to disagree with any of that. That's wonderful. I guess I would add, what makes human beings happy, I believe, is not what they're able to grab or own or possess or wear or eat, but what they share. Is sharing the most happiness producing activity that human beings engage in. When you share, and when you're willing to give without expecting anything back in return, that really does produce, I think, in all of us, just biochemically, a sense of goodness and of peace that really could be the change in our day and the change in our world and the change in our whole culture.
Thank you once again for all of your sincere responses that you both gave today. As I've mentioned many times, this is the very first time we're having two interviewees at the same time, but I really think it was double productive for today. I hope your time was also meaningful. Once again, thank you very much and have a good day.
Bye.